So welcome to the webinar on how to find and retain cloud attachments. This is our newest release from the Data Lifecycle and Records Management team, as well as the eDiscovery Premium team. My name is Erica Telly, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager covering Data Lifecycle and Records Management. With me here today are David and Arun. David, how are you?
Hello. So my name is David Robbins. I am a product manager for our customer acceleration team, and I specialize in eDiscovery Premium, advanced audit, data lifecycle management, and records management.
Arun, how are you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Arun Gedela. I'm a product manager on the Microsoft Purview records management solution. I primarily manage features around records management in terms of auto labeling and all those features. Thank you.
Perfect. So just some logistics. Please put any questions in the chat you have as we go along. We'll either pause in the webinar to answer those or do a Q&A at the end where I'll note some questions. And if you're comfortable, I can call on you and take you off mute, or we can just answer it as you've typed it. So with that, let's kick off the webinar. All right, so to start, we're going to cover the business value and the why behind why we created this feature, as well as just a couple questions we know you're going to ask, so we'll get them out of the way at the beginning. Then we'll go through like what are cloud attachments exactly. Some people might not be familiar. Then of course we'll talk about retaining cloud attachments and then how to find them using eDiscovery Premium. And then finally, of course, our Q&A. I want to make sure you get all your questions answered. So starting with the first question I know everyone's going to ask, will this recording and the slides be available? Yes, absolutely. We're going to have this webinar posted publicly on our Microsoft Security YouTube channel. It takes us about a week to generate the closed caption file and the process of getting it up there. So I will send everybody who registered a link as soon as that's ready to both the video and the slides. The next question I know everyone wanted to ask, which is, how is this licensed? So this will be an E5 feature. Of course, we have various varieties of E5 licensing, which you can see on the screen. And then I will note this is a feature that kind of spans both retention and eDiscovery capabilities. So we do have a couple add-on SKUs, but honestly, once you're buying 2 of those add-ons, it's just less expensive to buy E5 compliance. So just wanted to note that. And then the last question, when can I use this? So the great news is you might already have it in your tenant. It is rolling out now, and if you don't have it yet, you will by the end of this month, the end of August 2022. Right now, we're planning for this to be generally available in January 2023. Of course, that could be sooner or later, just depending on how the public preview goes and a variety of factors. Just a note, so in the public preview, we're not supporting text links. So if you type some text, use insert link. We're not supporting those in the public preview, but those will be supported at GA. And then finally, for those that are in the US government, our government clouds, this will be available around March 2023. And then post general availability, we will also add support for Teams shared channels. We have a slide with more detail about what that means a little later in the presentation. I'm just going to answer James's question really quick. How do we determine if cloud attachments have been enabled in our tenant? You'll be able to see it when you create an auto-apply retention policy, which Arun will show you in the demo coming up. I think that's the easiest way to tell. So Arun, maybe if you could just point that out when you get to that part of the demo, please. So why did we create this feature? Well, it was a very popular request, first of all. But why was it popular? Number one, this is a feature that's commonly required by for regulatory reasons, especially for financial service regulations in the US. I put the specific ones we hear mentioned frequently there on the slide with a link to more information about those regulations and how M365 is compliant with them. But then this is also really a common request for audits and other internal investigations. It's very common that people might want to see what version of a file was shared in an email or a chat at that time. It's the context that's important there. We'll get into that in just a second. So now, what are these cloud attachment things? Well, let me tell you. So first, they're links to documents that are stored in OneDrive or in SharePoint. They're often, created when you're sharing a file in an email, a Teams message, a Teams chat. So instead of actually attaching the physical file to the Teams message or the email, you're essentially attaching a link to the file so that everybody's editing the same version. For those of us that have been around, the Microsoft 365 world for a while, or even the SharePoint world, we're very familiar with these. They've been around a long time. So just to have a visual, here's an example of adding an attachment in a Microsoft Teams chat. So we could choose a link from existing file in our OneDrive, or when we click Upload from Computer, we're actually uploading the file, putting it in a folder in our OneDrive, and then sharing the link to that file in the chat. So you may be using cloud attachments and you don't even know it. Looking at an example in an email, when you do an attachment, it prompts you, do you want to attach a copy of the file or a cloud attachment? So the suggested attachments you see on the screen are cloud attachments. Also, the upload and share and browse cloud locations options are cloud attachments as well. Why do we do this? Of course, it improves collaboration. No multiple versions floating around. No, well, shoot, I changed the one from 2 days ago, not the one now. We're all editing the same file. We're using co-authoring. Everyone's on the same page. It also improves security, especially when you're dealing with sensitive information, or in the case of records, you don't want multiple copies of that record floating around sometimes. And then, of course, it reduces the size of your email messages because you're not creating a copy of a 20 meg file in each person's mailbox that received the email. All right, so what challenges does this present? So before this release, let's do an eDiscovery search. When we return that search, we just see that there was a link to a file in the email message or the Teams message. If you click that link, you could sometimes access the file if you had permission, but maybe it's only the latest version of the file, not the version that was shared in that actual email or in that actual Teams message. So, this creates a lot of extra administration work for audits and investigations. And then, of course, now we can link the message to the actual version that was shared. So the remainder of the webinar is going to talk about how we solved this challenge. Before we move on, Arun, David, anything else to add?
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Arun.
Thank you, Erica. I'm really excited to share this feature with you all today. It's been about 2+ years of in the making, and there's been a lot of improvements that we were able to achieve. Of course, there are things that we can definitely improve, and that's why we are in public preview to kind of receive your feedback and improve on it. On the next slide. So before we head into the demo, right? And there are some aspects of this feature that we would like to kind of touch upon, share how it has been designed, and get a decent understanding on what happens behind scenes, so you are able to well appreciate what happens later in the demo. So on the first point here, generally our users store their files in SharePoint OneDrive locations, as Erica mentioned. And we do have, retention policies or labels applied to these files in these locations. So we cannot do anything with these because these are already kind of compliant. But the moment they start sharing these in Teams and Exchange, Outlook, what we do behind scenes when a cloud attachment policy is in action is, there is a hidden folder called preservation hold library in each of these SharePoint OneDrive locations. What we do essentially is we identify the specific version of the file that has been shared in a specific communication, and we make a copy of that file and we store it in this secured location, and we apply the label to it, and so it is retained for the designated period. And then we kind of add a pointer to the Teams message or the Exchange email, so it can be discovered in the eDiscovery solution. So that's what happens. So some of the key points that I want to touch upon here is basically, we don't apply retention to the original files that users are collaborating on, because that's that might hamper their collaboration and how they kind of use the file. But what we are doing is kind of retaining a specific copy of the version that was exchanged in a secured location, which nobody has access to. I hope this gives you a good picture. And then now we'll go into what we will cover in the demo. The next slide, please. So in this demo, we'll briefly walk you through creating a retention label for cloud attachments, and then creating a retention auto labeling policy. As Erica mentioned, we've achieved this feature through the auto labeling, existing auto labeling experience. And there's a new type that we introduced there. We show I'll show you a cloud attachment example in Teams chat, and then we'll show you how it is preserved, and then we'll go into eDiscovery, case creation, custodian additions, and then the reviewing set, the collection set, and then how it can be exported. I'll cover the first half, and then my colleague David would cover the eDiscovery part of the section. Okay. Here we are in the records management solution, Microsoft Purview records management solution, and we can click on create a label. I'll just quickly click on the create label, and here you can provide a friendly name for this label. Please remember that this label that you're creating is going to be applied on the preserved copy, not the original version that has been exchanged between your information workers. And you can provide a friendly description for this, and then add your file plan information. This changes by organization, so it's pretty open. And then the next thing we get to is, we definitely want to retain this version for a specific period, so we'll choose that. And the next is the retention period. I want to spend some time here. It's recommended, it's good to have the retention period selected for the same duration you would want the conversation to be retained. So if you want the conversation to be available, say for 3 years, it's good to kind of preserve all the documents that relate to that conversation for the same 3-year period. And another thing to notice and kind of call out here is the trigger for retention period start. We recommend using when items were labeled, because if the items were created long back and then you're applying retention to it based on creation date or modified date, you might not even retain it for enough time. So when items are labeled means from the time that version has been preserved, you will actually start the retention period. So it's kind of intuitive to use when items were labeled, but there could be multiple use cases which obviously you could use. The next step is actually deciding if you want to treat it as a record or retain items. For this purpose of the demo, we'll keep it as a regular retain item, and then we'll proceed. And then, and what happens after you set the label, right? Like you can choose to delete the items automatically. You can start a disposition review. This is like any other label. For the purpose of this demo, we'll go with delete items automatically and create the label. Okay, then one last way to kind of review and finish creating the label. Okay. Now that we've created a retention label, that we're going to use for these cloud attachment files, as I mentioned before, we have achieved cloud attachments through auto labeling. So we'll choose auto apply this label to specific type of content and click done. Now we are in the flow where we create the auto labeling policy, and you can provide a friendly name and provide the description. Here is where I want to pause. I think there was a question on how can I know that cloud attachments has been enabled on my tenant. This screen, when you try creating an auto labeling policy, and when you come to this screen where you select the type of content, there is this fourth new option, which says apply label to cloud attachments shared in Exchange and Teams. And that is the option that allows you to create a cloud attachments auto labeling policy. We'll proceed. We'll use this and we'll click next. And here, like any other policy, we recently launched adaptive scopes. Of course, you can use adaptive scopes for this policy. Where you can scope it to specific sites based on department or user types. So for this demo, we'll keep it simple. That's and then we'll choose static and proceed. Okay. Another important thing, we are not applying. We will have to apply our policies are set in such a way that our policies often act on workloads or locations where content lives, and you can see that there's no exchange here. Because what we are talking about is cloud attachments, and most of these attachments that we are speaking about are actually in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft 365 group SharePoint sites. So that's why you're choosing these locations. And this is just our general architecture that we work based off where the content lives, and it works within the scope of the workloads better. And I think this is the most robust way of doing retention and choosing locations. So we'll choose all locations here only because you would not be able to decide which sites you want to kind of include and exclude for the moment. So I'll go with that example where it's a good practice to have all of the sites included, so that way you're not missing any. I'll click on next and proceed. Since we came through the label creation process, the label is automatically kind of available here. You could definitely replace a label here, but we'll for the sake of simplicity, we'll just choose this label and move forward. Next. This is where you have a chance to review this policy. It's like any other review screen. So you finish, you check all the details, and you finish, you submit. This is the stage where we kind of enter into the sharing activity. So as I mentioned before, the first part is creating the policy. The second part is the sharing activity to happen. And then the third part is behind the scenes, we kind of retaining the copy of the file version shared. Now, I want to touch upon the messaging methods that we support today. We definitely support emails. Within Teams, there are multiple modes of communication. One is using the chats, one-to-one or one-to-many, the group chats. Or Teams standard channel messages, which is the standard channels, and the private channel messages. So we support emails, chats, standard channels, and private channels in this public preview. And shared channels is something that we would support post-GA. It's just to be aware that share channels is not yet fully supported, or it's not supported at this moment. Okay. Now I'll show you an example of a sharing event here. Lisa is sharing two of her files, the files in her OneDrive with Hannah. And these are cloud attachments, as we can see from how they are represented in Teams. We'll see how these files are, where these files are located in Lisa's OneDrive. Next. So this is Lisa's OneDrive, and there's a folder called sales info. When we click on that, we see the two files that she used to share with Hannah. Now that the sharing has happened, and the cloud attachments policy is in action, it takes a couple of minutes. And then we detect the sharing event, and then somehow magically, when you go to this is a pre-done example just to save time. So when you go to the preservation whole library of Lisa's OneDrive, we will see a folder called shared versions. When you click on that, you should see the two files two file versions that have been shared with Hannah. Now, one thing you will notice is the name. The name is a GUID and a combination of some unique values. So that way, there's no duplication that's happening. It is done for a lot of reasons. And you can also see the preservation original file location in the third column, and you can also see the preservation original file name. So this will help you understand what we are talking about, kind of in relation to what file was shared. Two things to call out here. One, there's only one copy that is created here for a specific version exchange. So Lisa could be sharing the same version with another person, in another conversation. But what we do is we don't create another copy just for that. We actually go and make sure that we pick this file, and we kind of add the pointer to that communication as well. So both these communications point to the same file. Another aspect is every time Lisa updates that file, there's a new version that's created. So I want to make sure that you understand that enabling versioning on the SharePoint and OneDrive locations will help you investigate better. So the specific version that was altered. Otherwise, we will always end up with the latest version that is in the PHL. So it's recommended you enable versioning if it is not by default. And then the last part is, for every new file that is created and shared, you will see a copy here. So it will be there as part of your storage. Okay. And this
just want to
brings
jump
us
in really
Yeah.
quick.
Yes,
I think you just magically answered all the questions in the chat. But please, attendees, if you have remaining questions about how the versioning and the copies work, please put them in there and we'll get them answered.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now that the retention has happened, I will pass the presentation to David, who can help us understand how these can be discovered in context of a conversation within the eDiscovery premium collection set. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Okay, so hi everyone. Let's talk eDiscovery. And we'll start by going back to the challenges of cloud attachments for eDiscovery. So if you collect an email attachment an email that includes a cloud attachment, you'll see the cloud attachment link, but not the actual document. This presents a challenge if you're trying to understand the full historical context of the email and document. And you can see this in the example on the on the right, where we have a copy of that email, but all we have is that cloud link and not the actual attachment. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So eDiscovery Premium gives the eDiscovery Manager the ability to not only collect the email in question, but also to include the cloud attachment document in the review set. And while eDiscovery Premium has had this capability for some time now, previously we've only been able to collect the most recent version or all versions of that document. But thanks to this new auto labeling policy, we are now able to give you the most recent version and the version that was originally shared. So for this demo, we would use a basic workflow that aligns with pretty common eDiscovery practices. First, we're going to start by adding a custodian to a case, collecting the relevant content from data sources, committing the collection to a review set, reviewing and analyzing data in that review set, and exporting and downloading the case data. So first, we're going to start by creating an eDiscovery case. So we are going to start off in the Microsoft Purview Compliance Center, and we're going to be going to eDiscovery Premium. So let's go ahead and go to eDiscovery Premium. And in eDiscovery Premium, we're going to start a new case. So you click on the Create a Case link here, and we're going to give our case name a unique name and a unique case number and a description. Do you want to configure additional settings after creating this case? We're going to leave that as the default yes. And then we need to talk about case format. So under case format, you're going to have two different options. One is the new case format, and two is the classic case format. And there is one thing you need to know about those when we are talking about cloud attachments. So first, the new case format will have the option to collect cloud attachments on by default. But with the classic case format, you'll have to select the option to include the cloud attachments, and we'll show you what that looks like momentarily. So we're going to hit save here to create our case. And it's going to start off in the settings tab, and we're going to go to the data sources tab next. So under data sources, we're going to add data source, and we're going to add a new custodian. So here, we're going to add two custodians. Just keep in mind that you do need to type at least 3 characters of the custodian's name to add them to the case. So in this example here, if you want to go back for 1 second, we have added 2 custodians. And then after we add the custodians, it's important to associate the custodial locations with those custodians. And you can see by default, we're including their primary mailbox and their OneDrive site. Okay, then we're going to click the next button. And then we have the option to put those custodial locations on hold. So you'll see that you can check the checkbox to make sure that those locations are on legal hold. And let's hit next. And then we have the option of reviewing the settings before we actually create those custodians. So you can look at this, you'll see the locations that you are adding. In this case, we're only adding the primary mailbox and the OneDrive site. And you can hit submit. Okay. So now we have added 2 custodians to this case. And you'll see that the indexing job status is in progress. Now, generally, I'm going to recommend that you wait for the indexing job to complete before going to the next phase, which is collections. So we're going to wait till the indexing job status says successful, and then we're going to go ahead and create our new collection. So if you don't mind going to the collections tab, and under the collections tab, we're going to create a new collection. So we're going to put in a case name and a case description. And then we really need to specify the locations that we want to search. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the button for selecting custodians. And then we're going to choose the 2 custodians that we added under that data sources tab. So go ahead and add those. And now we need to choose the custodial locations that we want to search against, because that's what we're doing in this collection is we're choosing the locations that we want to search. So we're going to leave this as kind of the default where we're choosing the custodian's primary mailbox and their OneDrive site. And we're going to hit next. Now, under data sources, if we had added any non-custodial data sources, this is where we go to do that. A non-custodial data location being any location that is not necessarily associated with the custodian. So we're going to go ahead and hit next here. And then that brings us to additional locations. If we had the need to search across any location that we did not add under data sources, this is where we would go to do that. Now, just keep in mind that these additional locations will not include advanced indexing unless they are added as data sources. So if you have not put them in that data sources location that we showed earlier, it's not going to include that advanced indexing. So let's go ahead and hit next here. And this is where we define our collection conditions. So this is where we're going to build our query. So for the sake of this demo, we're going to keep this pretty simple. We're just going to use the recipient search property. And let's go ahead and review our results. So a couple things we need to mention on this screen. So we're going to start off with two options. One is to get the collection estimate. And that's usually what I recommend, because the collection estimate is going to give us some really important information about our collection before we submit that as a review set. So we'll be able to see the estimated size of the review set, and we'll even going to be able to see a preview of the results before we send it to review set. So normally I do recommend starting off with the collection estimate, but for the sake of this demo, we're going to go ahead and take those results and we're going to put it into a review set. So if you select the review set option, there are two different options under that. First, we have the ability to create a new review set. And second, we have the ability to add the contents to an existing review set. But since this is the first review set in our case, we're going to go ahead and create a new one. So I'm going to fill out the name of the review set, make sure it's a unique name. And then under additional collection settings, there's a few things that we need to talk about. So the first being is you can see here where it says collect cloud attachments from items found in your search results. That is going to enable the ability to include cloud attachments in your search result. So the big advantage of that in the new case format is that it's on by default. But if you're using the classic case format, this option will not be checked by default, and you'll have to check it manually if you want to be able to collect those cloud attachments. Just another reason why we recommend the new case format. So after we make sure that that option is checked for cloud attachments, if you're using the classic case format, next, we're going to go ahead and add all of our collection to a review set.
Hey, quick question before we move on. Let me get to the exact chat. So Graham asks, is the custodian edition required for historic versions? Guessing the advanced index is required for this to work.
Well, we would need to make sure that the locations that we need to collect from, like OneDrive and Exchange, are basically checked. And the custodian makes that easy to do, but you could manually pick them too.
Okay, perfect. Ryan asks, with this change, does it support and discover files that after sharing have been renamed, moved, or deleted?
So it depends on the queries that you're using. There's other factors. It will show basically what versions we have available and any changes that you made on the current version, but I'd have to know a little bit more about that ask to tell you for sure.
Okay, maybe Ryan, you could put some more info. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And after we hit next, now we're going to have a little summary about the options that we picked. And I just wanted to call out that you can see here that collect cloud attachments from items found in your search results is included here, which is what we're looking for. So, okay, if you want to go ahead and submit this collection. Okay, now we're going to go to the Jobs tab. So as you can see here, now there is a new job for adding data to a review set. You can see that it is in progress. So we're going to wait for that job to be complete, which will mean that the review set has been fully completed. And then we're going to go to the review set tab. So under the review set tab, you're going to see all the review sets for this case. And now you see the review set that we just created. So let's go ahead and go into our review set now that it's completed. And here you have a review set. So in the review set, we have different options for sorting and grouping the documents and emails in the review set. But if you want to go to the next slide here, we're going to group this by family attachments. So after that's been selected, it's going to make it a little bit easier to read. But now let's talk about what we're looking for. So if you want to hit the next button here, and this is the same Teams conversation that we saw earlier in the presentation. And we see that this user, Lisa, has shared out 2 documents with Hannah. But now you can see that there's an issue with one of these documents. So the issue is that it looks like Serena's birthday is incorrect. She was born in 1967, not 1976. Can you please correct that? So now you can see that Lisa has made the change and notified Hannah that the change has been made. So now let's take a look back in our review set to see what that looks like from an eDiscovery perspective. So the first things first, we're going to look at the Teams transcript here. And you can see that, in fact, these 2 files are shared in the transcript. So you can see information about the shared files within the Teams transcript. And next, what we're going to do is view the document family. So this lets us kind of limit our view to only the documents that are relevant for this particular conversation. So now we have sorted this by the document family, and we still see here in the transcript what were the files that we're looking for. If you want to hit next here. Now we're going to go to the Lisa's OneDrive account. And we can see in Lisa's OneDrive account the most recent version of those documents. So we see that under the sales information folder, the most recent version of those documents when they were last modified and their size. So now let's go to the next slide. And in the review set, we can see those exact respective files. So we have the most recent up-to-date version of those documents, and we can see them here. So on the next slide, we're going to go out to the user's preservation hold library. And in the preservation hold library, in the shared versions folder that were shown earlier, we can see that we have the version of the document from when it was initially shared by Lisa. So you can see that, the original name of the file, when it was preserved, and the location. So this is the version that was shared by Lisa. And we're going to go back to our review set. And in our collection, in the review set, we can see that we returned those versions in our search. So now we have not only the most current version of that document, but a copy of the version from when it was shared. So if you want to hit the next here. Now let's see what that looks like. So if you don't remember, we had an issue with Serena's birth date. That she wasn't born in 1976, she was born in 1967. So we've highlighted the incorrect date over here in the version that was shared. So you can see that this is the version that was initially shared by Lisa. And on our next slide, we can see the most recent version where we have the correct date. So we can see the different versions and any change that was made between the 2. So now we know what it looks like when the version was created and shared. And then we have the most recent version 2 where we can see what changes were made. Let's go to the next slide.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Can you see the version number within the metadata?
I believe that is there. So if we wanted to go view the metadata information there, you can return a lot of that information.
Yeah, so the metadata tab is right there. People. Thank you.
Okay. So we've looked at our results. We like what we see. Now the next step is we're going to export those results. So under the Actions tab, you're going to see a button for export. So if you can go ahead and hit that button for me. This is going to be where we create our export. So the export name, make sure that you give it a unique name and a description. You have the options to export the selected documents only, all the filtered documents if you were using a filter, or all documents in the review set. And then you have different output options, including report only, loose files and PSTs, condensed directory structure, and condensed directory structure exported to your Azure storage account. But for the sake of this demo, we're going to go with loose files and PSTs. And let's hit that export button. Okay, so we're going to wait for our export to finish. You can see that we have one export that's in progress and one that is successful. So we're going to wait for that to say successful. And after it is, we're going to go into the export and simply download our results. So select the files that we want to download and download our results. And then I included some slides of what an exported result looks like. So if you want to hit next here, we have a export over here that's been downloaded. We have a folder for our conversations. We have a folder for our Exchange files or PSTs and for our SharePoint files. And we also include an export load file and any warnings or errors that you might receive. So if you want to go to the next screen, this would be the most recent version of these documents. So we have them, then you can even follow the folder path to see where we downloaded them from the sales info folder. So this is the most recent version we have of those documents. And on the next screen, we have those preserved versions. So now you can see where we've included those versions shared in our export. So our export results not only include the most current version, but the version that was shared too, that we pulled from the review set.
Sorry, I meant to delete that roadmap slide. Perfect. Let's go to the Q&A first, and then I'm going to come back to some of these slides. Nick,
Yeah, Nick was answering some questions.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I just turned on your mic. I'm wondering if you might expand on that question that you answered in the chat about whether retention labels are required for the eDiscovery premium search to work.
Sure.
And okay, perfect.
Yeah. So I was just responding to try to illuminate that, hey, the existing default behavior of Cloud Attachment Collection that's been available for some time is that the current will go out and collect the current version of the Cloud Attachment that was included in the email or the Teams conversation. And you don't actually have to have the OneDrive or the SharePoint location where the Cloud Attachment is located as a scope of that collection. We'll go kind of bring that in, but just the current version. So that's the current behavior that until you have this retention policy set. Once this retention policy is set, then the behavior you'll see is that you'll have both the current live version of the Cloud Attachment as well as that version as shared that was gathered from the preservation hold library.
For my clarification, do you need to essentially have this auto apply Cloud Attachment policy turned on or configured in order to collect the new Cloud Attachment versions?
I'll answer that. Erica,
Perfect.
yes, we need the retention auto labeling policy to preserve these cloud attachments. Good answer?
Perfect.
Yep.
Yep. I'm just going to go through here and answer some existing questions. Okay, so Ryan expanded on his question. If a user shares a file and then renames it from, say, draft to final in the file name, and then moves that same file to another team site, will all the versions of the file be returned in one? He said collection, I think he means family, in one family, or will I have to run an additional search for the newly named and moved item? So I think to summarize, it means like, how does this whole idea of family and collection locations and being able to associate a file to a message work when the file name changes and or the location changes?
So, Ryan, are we talking about as far as creating the shared version and linking that to the change file name, or are we talking about eDiscovery?
Ryan, just a second. I'm going to allow your mic. Feel free. Okay, you're allowed now. Feel free to come off mute and talk.
Both, I think, David. So if I have that file and it's in a repository and the user shares that file, and I'm a reviewer of that file, the user then changes that file from draft to final. That then goes out to another additional person or group of persons, if you like. If I'm running that eDiscovery search, does it pull back all the items? So I have 2 shares when it's draft and 2 shares when it's final, both in 2 different locations with 2 different file names. When I run a search, does it come back as one family item, or do I need to run 2 searches for 2 family items? Hopefully that makes sense.
So I think if I'm following this correctly here, so now as far as the cloud attachment goes, I'll let Arun answer that one, whether or not, I don't know if after we move it to a different location, whether it would go back to the preservation whole library of the original location.
Mhm.
I'm gonna say no to that, but I'll let Arun kind of answer that because the cloud attachment area is his
Yeah, sure,
area.
sure. Yeah, I'll take this question. At least the first half, eDiscovery, I'll leave it. Ryan, so if I understand your question, so what happens
Mhm.
when somebody renames the file, right? So
Yeah.
at the time of sharing, what we do is we pick the file last available file name, because SharePoint doesn't do versioning for file names, right? You only know the file name at the specific point in time. So we pick the version, we pick the file name that exists at the time of sharing, and we will, at the time of preservation, I want to be clear there because, it takes a couple of minutes before, we kind of preserve the document. So at the time of preservation, we pick the last available file name and we store it in PHL for you. And that information is, kind of made available to eDiscovery, but I think there is some work in eDiscovery to pull that information. Okay, so that's the first part. Now, when you said the file is renamed and it is reshared, now a new sharing event has happened at the time of preserving the new share, because obviously when you change the file name, the version changes. So when the version changes, you have to pick this new file and also save that new file with the name that is available at that point in time in the respective PHL. So if the file was available in the PHL, we always go based off where the file was located at the time of sharing, right? So if you think the file got moved, then we need to make sure that the policy has scoped in the location that the new location as well, right? If that is the case, then the new location will have a PHL and will have the shared version folder created and the file will sit there. Does that
Okay,
answer?
I got it. Yeah, that actually answers the question. Thank you very much. Cheers, Erica. Cheers, David. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple OneDrive questions. So what happens when a custodian reaches storage limits in OneDrive for Business due to the PHL? So in that case, you can assign more quota to that OneDrive. That would be our recommended solution for that. And then I think there was another OneDrive question.
Wow,
Erica, can I
is-
pitch in for a quick
Okay.
note
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the storage? I think there was another question around limits, which is basically, is there a tenant level limit for cloud attachment? So, the limits on cloud tenant level, there's need some more investigation from my side, but obviously there is a limit in Outlook when you're sending an email or when you're sending a Teams message. There are limits to how many cloud attachments you can use in a specific message. So I'll make sure the documentation is updated for that, but we support whatever the solutions the platform support at this moment. So there are not just tenant level limits, there are also limits per message is what I wanted to make sure you clarified. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Ram, do you want to come off mute? I'm interested in what you were saying around the version metadata, and also if this isn't how you expect it to show, what would be how you would like it to look in the future, if you could provide some more information.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you very much for the presentation. It's been great today. My question's more around when you're doing those data retrievals, especially for big cases, using the filters and the associated metadata within the review sets. I was finding in my testing, there was two key metadata points, which was is from document version or version number that I'd want to filter on. And then it would show me any cloud attachments that had multiple versions a lot easier. Might be something to check, especially for big financial organizations, which this is key. Might be something to check in the background there.
Nick, any questions about that feedback or anything?
Yeah, no, thanks, Graham. That makes a lot of sense. I guess one thing I would recommend is if you collect the SharePoint content, we do provide the option to collect all versions of that document, kind of that live existing document in the SharePoint OneDrive location. And we did do an update recently to include the version number as well as the kind of modified time of that version. And so if I understand the discussion correctly so far, you're saying that on the PHL version, you were looking for that version number. And so I would check the live version and see that the version number is there. And if you collect all versions of the particular document, you'll pull in kind of 1 through 20 or whatever it might be, and that version number will be there. We'll do some looking on the PHL version, but because that's kind of just done a snapshot of the version at the time it was shared, it doesn't have that same, and Arun can chime in here as well, doesn't have that same lineage of all the versions of that document that's been iterated over time. It's kind of just a snapshot of that version that was sent as a cloud attachment. So for that type of analysis, I think that you're describing, if you look at kind of the live version that's still kind of present on the SharePoint OneDrive, you might get that level of metadata that you're interested in.
I've been trying it different ways to try and get that metadata out. And in the demo that you showed, you weren't collecting all of the versions.
We did not collect all the versions in this demo.
No.
Yeah, we didn't. Right.
No, we did not.
So I'm doing the same thing.
I think we're saying if you want to have that, then do check the collect all versions box.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Feel free to follow up with me on offline if it doesn't work.
That's great. Thank you very much.
All right. So a couple things. Would love to hear your opinions on what the next eDiscovery webinar topic should be. I wasn't brave enough to try any type of poll on my first webinar. So if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat in order of preference, what would be the topic you'd want to see next? You can vote for any one of them, all of them. If you want to see eDiscovery and Teams, put B first. Compliance boundary second, put A second. If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat. And then I'm going to export the chat for the eDiscovery people, and we can give you that information. So I'm just going to give everyone a second to vote. Let's see. It looks like I missed maybe a question from Arun on OneDrive. Let's see. You didn't reply to the question, so I'm scrolling, looking for it. Just gonna do that. Okay. When is it available to capture files directly shared from OneDrive site? Okay, so Arun, to turn on cloud attachments, you'll just need to set up that auto apply retention policy for cloud attachments, include OneDrive in the locations, and then that's how you turn it on. It's rolling out now in public preview. So if you don't see it in your tenant yet, if you don't see the option to create the cloud attachment auto apply policy, please wait until the end of August and it will be in your tenant. If that doesn't answer your question, just go ahead and add information in the chat. All right. So then our next records management webinar is going to be on Wednesday, October 5th, same time. And we're going to be going over our new Power Automate integration, which allows you to create custom disposition workflows, custom certificates of destruction. I mean, it really opens the door of possibilities. Since you're on the call, you're probably a compliance super fan. So this will be available in public preview sometime around the very end of August, very beginning of September for you to start using. So you'll have a good month to try it out for yourself and come with all of your, super fan questions. And watch for our social media and tech community for the registration link for that. And then, yeah, if you want to try this out, if you don't have E5, you can have a free trial. There's the link for that. And then if you're an E5 customer, would love for you to try out an auto label retention policy for cloud attachments and practice using this in eDiscovery Premium. So with that, thank you very much. Really
Thank you very
appreciate
much,
you all
everyone.
attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.